when I walked on stage one night, I kicked my leg in the air, like during the intro of my name, and I kicked my shoe and it hit a woman in the nose in the front row and gave her an immediate bloody nose. And she like complained, which I was like, one, you're at a comedy show. This is hilarious. and two, it was obviously accidental. It's not like I was like, this woman will have the worst night of her life.
Hi, I'm Zack Newmark, and this is Damn Yankee. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts for the best interviews with the performers and authors based here in the Netherlands and those traveling through the country. Today, we have a woman who is very well recognized for her enduring positivity, explosive shows, and unparalleled work ethic. Stacey Smith has worked in comedy for almost 2 decades, and if you like musical comedy, you'll definitely want to know who she is. She's currently a mainstage cast member and the director of education at the famous Boom Chicago Theater here in Amsterdam. They've got their big annual comedy show going on right now. And Stacey is also the creator of Stace Jam, an improvised solo musical extravaganza that has earned her critical acclaim. She's fresh off being interviewed by 60 Minutes and has left them to come talk to us. Stacey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
What were you doing on 60 Minutes?
They're doing a piece on Boom Chicago, and we did a lot of pieces like at our 30th year anniversary, which was 2 years ago. So it's really nice to have like more press coming in an odd year, 32 years. But they're doing a small segment on Boom and what it's like to perform for Dutch people, and some of our alumni are being interviewed. Very, very cool.
Where is this coming from that 60 Minutes would be here? I mean, are they just following like Seth Meyers around, or are they here,
I think
profiling really the whole theater?
I think they're really profiling the whole theater, but the perk of the festival each year is that we do have a lot of our like real lovingly our veteran cast members and our alumni and our celebs come back and visit the theater.
Yeah. And Seth's been quite a cheerleader for Boom Chicago over the years too.
Yeah. I actually think it's a really interesting thing. And I started to notice this when we started our festival 5 years ago, that we were doing it in the height of COVID the first year.
This was when you were running the festival, right?
The very first year, we had some of our alumni live stream in, and we did like interviews. So we had like a full camera setup, and then they were obviously remote in the US. And I was like, for them to take, like for Jordan Peele to take time out of his schedule to like do a very candid interview, like that says a lot about the theater and that people really loved their time in Amsterdam and had a good experience. So for me as a current cast member, that's always really, really nice.
Okay, so that's totally something with you that I wanted to talk about because Peach, our producer, dug up this quote from an article that you wrote where you talk about the different times that you've auditioned for Saturday Night Live.
Oh yeah, spoiler alert, not on.
Right, and what I loved was, where you say, spoiler alert, I'm not on the show, but I walked away with something better, universal healthcare in the Netherlands.
So true.
And this was how long ago now that you moved here?
I've been here for almost 7 years, but my last audition, actually, they brought me out and I flew from Amsterdam to Chicago to do a live audition. So I've had 3 failed but very fun auditions in the last decade or so. So
yeah, and you're not from Amsterdam, of course. You're from Long Island, and you lived in Chicago for a while.
Yeah.
I think you lived in Boston for a while.
Yep.
What is it about living in the Netherlands that's sort of kept you here?
Oh, buckle up. I love Amsterdam so much. I love the whole country, and like I'm truly obsessed with it here. And really, I had signed a contract to come here for 3 months, and then COVID happened, and I had to make like kind of a hard decision of if I was going to go back to Chicago and like live amongst friends or in like my then partner's parents' basement in the suburbs. And I really, really loved it here and really wanted to give Boom Chicago a fair shot because my first 3 months were so incredible. And the fact that we get to do so many shows and have so many reps and learn how to be a universal comedian. I mean, there's just so many benefits of being a Boom Chicago actor. And I fell so deeply in love with the country really during COVID when everything was shut down and you could really explore by bike and by foot and see all the incredible things in the country. And then I really have had, Dutch people have been a learning curve for me for sure. I can't say that I loved them from the jump. When I first got here, I was like, wow, these people are quite difficult and I don't really know how to read them. And I was told that, especially with Dutch women, it's hard to make Dutch female friends. Because they have their social circles from when they were kids and they are very loyal people and they have their friendship. So the first Dutch friend I had, I was like, I've locked it in. I have successfully done the Netherlands. And now I actually live in Zeist, which is a small village outside Utrecht.
30 minutes from here.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm pretty integrated in Dutch culture, but I've had really positive experiences kind of all the way around, even with healthcare. I joke about healthcare, but I do have to use the healthcare system quite a lot. I have endometriosis, which is a menstruation disorder. And that has been really eye-opening because the way that the healthcare system works is totally different. And so I've just had positive experiences all the way around. And I've got a season ticket at FC Utrecht, which is a football team, which for Americans is soccer, but don't ever say that while you're here. So I'm pretty integrated and I love Dutch culture.
I mean, Zeist is, for anybody who hasn't been there, it's a little bit bigger than a village and it's smaller than, it's like a town at best.
It's like I am Belle in Beauty and the Beast, but no one is saying bonjour. They're all just ignoring me. That's what Zeist is like. But it's all beautiful forests. It's really beautiful. And actually the fact that they don't speak English there has been a real benefit for me learning Dutch. So I actually first was like, oh no, I'm the only American in Zeist. And now it's been really, really nice because I've been able to force myself to learn a lot more.
Yeah. And, Zeist is, I think you've kind of described it as sort of like this personal haven for you also, right? Where it's just, if you come from a big city, even, not that people would, Amsterdam's, of course, the biggest city in the Netherlands, but it's by no means a big city.
Well, I've gone from New York to Chicago to Boston to Amsterdam to Zeist. So I have literally not downgraded, but essentially I see no one.
Right.
I see no one anymore. So it's really great to see you. Yeah.
I mean, people who haven't been here in the Netherlands, might not understand that a 30-minute cab ride from Amsterdam to Zeist, that it's going to cost a fortune to do it. If you're in Chicago or in New York and you're taking a 20 or 30-minute cab ride, it's a little bit more typical than somebody doing the same thing here.
Yeah.
So, after you get off the stage at Boom or, one of the other events that you do, is that, a challenge for you to not hang out after the show and just instead kind of race off to catch the train home?
Yeah, I think more so recently, it's sometimes that not hanging out thing is just because I have to set the boundary of oh, you need 8 hours of sleep to survive. And for other people to survive you. I don't function on 6 hours and I don't function on 9 hours. 8 hours of sleep does this woman get? And I think that sometimes, I think that I also went really hard socially at Boom for the first 4 or 5 years I was there, that I stayed and talked to people for hours after shows because I love to talk to people. So I think that I balance that, a few nights a week stay and then one night just cut right out. So it just kind of depends. And
you moved out here with, someone who's still a cast member, but you two aren't together. That's Matt Castelvi, friend of the podcast. And when you guys moved out here, we had talked to him about his reasons for being interested in it, but what were kind of your reasons for being interested in, coming out to Amsterdam in the first place? Yeah, actually, so basically after I was working on cruise ships for Second City for a while and kind of doing the touring life. And then after that, I was traveling mostly at improv festivals internationally, teaching musical improv. And so I have been traveling a lot and really kind of seeing different parts of the world really opened up my mind to things, and especially just comedy in general.
watching improvisers in Tallinn, Estonia is an experience that everyone should have. It's just totally different. And the way that the world sees comedy, there's so many things that are similar across the world and then things that are very different. And I think that made me a stronger improviser and stronger improv teacher. So I was mostly touring. And in 2018, a year before I had moved here, I actually taught a musical improv workshop to the cast of Boom Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And Simon Lucas was in that cast then, who is a friend of the podcast. I like that you said that. And I just really connected with them. I guested in a show that week, kept in touch with everyone, and then came on another tour a year later in September of 2019. And when I was guesting, the owner, Andrew, was in the audience. And after the show, he said, "Do you want to move here?" And I was like, yeah. And I remember I called Matt and he was like half asleep in Chicago. And I was like, "Do you want to move to Chicago?" And he's like, "Yeah, whatever."
Do you want to move to Amsterdam?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to move to Amsterdam? And he was like, "Yeah, of course I do." And 6 weeks later, we moved. So it was a very quick thing. And Boom Chicago is a very coveted comedy job. So even when you're growing up as like a sweet comedy angel, when you're first starting to take improv classes in any city in the United States, you know that Boom Chicago is one of those big things. Like the reason I got into improv is like I read like, where did Tina Fey and Amy Poehler start? And then I went to Second City in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a comedy nerd from the minute I started walking and talking. And I think that I've always been very curious about Boom Chicago. And the fact that I was asked based on my performance was much cooler experience for me because I am not a good improv auditioner. So I was very thankful that someone saw me in my natural state. Mm-hmm. And liked that.
Was it even an idea in your head to move out of the States at that point or to, look abroad? I mean, you had been traveling for work and...
Yeah, no, not really. I really had a pretty good thing going in Chicago, and I was teaching quite a lot at all the training centers and running a training center at the kind of Comedy Sports, which is like a theater sports, which is a short form theater that's a chain kind of throughout the world. And I guess I was at a point in my career after doing improv professionally for 10 years that I was like, I wonder what's next, because there wasn't really some way for me to like move up. And the next thing was to either start my own training center or something, or to be able to work at a theater where I'm performing full time. Mm-hmm. And that kind of...
But it wasn't necessarily like, leaving the States. It was...
No, but if you ask me this in the last like 5 years or in the last few years, with everything that's happening in America, I would have definitely found reasons to get out. So now I'm very thankful. And I do have a lot of friends that are like, "Can I visit you? Right. Can I stay forever? Are there job openings?" Yeah. So,
was there anything specifically appealing about Amsterdam as a city that you, the times that you had visited here that maybe made you think, this is a place for me?
Absolutely. When I was first here in 2018, I remember sending a text to like a bunch of my friends saying like, "This place is a fairy tale. Like, it doesn't feel real." It felt like when I would like cycle around like after midnight through like the tunnel of the Rijksmuseum,
mm-hmm. The National Gallery.
Yeah. Then it was just like an incredible feeling that everything felt like kind of slower paced and very freeing. And I saw like a man carrying like IKEA furniture while riding a bike. And I was like, this is so impressive. How do I be amongst these elite? But I really just like felt really good energy from Amsterdam. And I was in Chicago, as a freelance performer, you're just gigging, you're just doing shows over and over in rehearsals and teaching to make a living. So it was nice to have kind of, like steady income and a secure job in comedy.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to explain it easily when I talk to other people back home, because when I first visited out here in 2003 or 2004, I came to Amsterdam for, I think, 3 days, part of a larger trip, visiting some friends. And there was something about being in the city that I had the idea would like living here, but that I didn't necessarily need to come back for a weekend trip.
Huh.
That
Yeah.
the weekend trip was fun, but if I was to come back, it would be
For
a
longer term.
longer.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. I don't know what that is, how to put into words kind of the vibe that I had in 2004, 5, whatever.
But I think that's very recognizable for Amsterdam specifically. I've never met a single person that came to Amsterdam and didn't like it.
Mhm.
Like if you're listening to the podcast and you're a person that doesn't like Amsterdam, come find me because I need to know why that would ever be true. I mean, it's just a really magnificent city. And that's just like spending a weekend.
Mhm.
And then you realize just like how incredible the culture is when you're here longer term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think after I'd moved here, I'd been here for a week or two, and I'd called my dad, and it was when, Skype wasn't really a thing yet, and you needed to buy credit on little phone cards and put them in the slots in the
Sure.
payphones to call internationally. And
Sure, I know
remember,
exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, and he asked me how I was liking it or if I enjoyed it, and I said at my height, it felt like I was in Easter Island.
Yeah.
Walking around all the statues because everybody is so
So tall.
a foot and a half taller than me.
That was wild. Yeah, it feels like you're in the redwood forest.
Right.
For sure. Everyone is too tall.
Right.
I would say too tall.
We talked a little bit about Stace Jam,
Mhm.
your thing, which is, of course, for people who don't know it, it's like a musical comedy, improv and not one woman show with a mix of monologues, solos, but also where you play multiple characters in a single scene.
Yeah.
Was your attraction to comedy always musical comedy?
I think that I had taken a few improv classes before I had known that there was musical improv. But I do have a music background. So I grew up a woodwind player. I was a band geek. I was a marching band. I mean, I would skip class to practice my bass clarinet. Like, I love music. And actually, I think pretty quickly into my improv career, I would say maybe 6 months after I started taking classes, I took my first musical improv class, and everything unlocked in like so I have been musically improvising for as long as I've been improvising.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a lot of people improvise for a while and then they're like, oh, it's time for this like scary thing. Which it's not scary once you do it. It's just people are like singing out loud in front of strangers, crazy. And it just made sense and it unlocked a lot. And I actually think I try to urge musical improvisers to start musical improv sooner, because actually all of the tools that you need to be a good musical improviser actually help you improvise. So you're creating characters faster. The music is your scene partner and you're saying yes to it and it's more emotional. So there's so many things that you learn from doing a musical improv class that are helpful in any setting, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really became obsessed. From that point forward, I was doing musical improv pretty much full time.
One thing that you mentioned was about how important it is saying yes. And
Mhm.
of course, for a lot of people, that's kind of the, backbone of improv comedy is, just sort of yes and or yes to push things along further. Is that such a significant mental hurdle that performers have to get over in order to be successful, especially when it comes to singing on stage?
I think that once people say yes and see how good it feels to say yes and then be received in a positive way after that, and they see the agreement, it becomes so much easier, so much faster. Because I mean, every day as normal human beings, we hear no. We hear no much more than we hear yes. So I do think that at first, because it's so natural that we hear the word no, or that we think that being combative is interesting and creates tension. You know what I mean? I think that
You've met my kids.
Yeah, they say no, but I think that is very natural, and you kind of have to, teach them how to get out of their comfort zone. I always say that art, is not made in your comfort zone, so you gotta get out of your comfort zone. But also, if people are really interested in doing comedy, and specifically at Boom Chicago, musical comedy is something that we do professionally. And so even if they don't want to do it full time, we will launch into songs. There is no way you could survive at Boom Chicago without singing a song a week, for example. But when I'm teaching my students, I'm not teaching them how to be funny because that doesn't really work. But I am teaching them how to make comedy easy and fun. Like, these are the things that are going to make comedy hard by saying no. Then you're going to work harder and your partner's going to have to work harder. And when you say yes and you're having fun and talking about experiences that you have actually had and characters that you actually know, it's just going to make your scene so much easier. And then if they do that, then we have less, uncomfortable things that pop up as well.
I mean, that I guess works on stage, but is that something that also speaks to your personality and your personal life?
Oh, for sure. I firmly believe that improv makes everyone a better human. And scientifically proven, statistically proven, and humor in general. Like, we all know that humor does something for us, and it's that release, especially with everything that's going on in the world. Comedy is so, so important. But I do think that yes and mentality has really helped me personality-wise, like, just dive into things that maybe I would never do and experience new things. And, that really is what brought me all over the world doing comedy. Like, someone would reach out to me from Sofia, Bulgaria, and I'm like, I'm going to do comedy in Sofia, Bulgaria. I don't know anything about Sofia, Bulgaria. Yes. I will go, and this will be a really new learning experience for me. I'm going to take in new information from a culture I don't know anything about. So I do think that really having yes and in my life has exponentially helped, not only as a comedian, but like in my everyday life with conversations, getting out of awkward small talk. That has been helpful, especially at the bar at Boom Chicago after shows. So I definitely think it has framed who I am.
I mean, were you always someone who enjoyed traveling in that way too? Because I think, I seem to remember reading something or seeing something that maybe you weren't such a big fan of travel.
I hate to travel. As someone who has been on a plane as many times as me, it's shocking that I still do it. I really do not like to fly. You could send me on a train anywhere. But I am not a good flyer.
Is it just flying that you don't like?
I don't really like buses either. I don't like sitting still, and I don't like being quiet. So these are very uncomfortable things for me. But I have gotten used to it. I've, found tools that then are helpful for me throughout the way. And sometimes at festivals, then I'm traveling with a group. So it all kind of depends. And I also, at some point, had to be like, if you want to do what you want to do, you have to get on this plane right now. And that is always worth it.
So it's not like, it's not so much that you don't like being other places or going to other places.
Love
it's
being
just
other
the
places.
actual getting from A to B that you
Yeah,
hate.
exactly. It's the transportation.
Yeah, because also working on a cruise ship is kind of totally in conflict with hating
and that'll trigger you forever.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
What was that experience like being a performer on a cruise ship? Because I can't, personally, cruise ships don't have a huge appeal for me.
I think a lot of people feel that way. It's either the best or the worst job in the world. And it depends on what your mindset is. So I think that out of the people that have done it, so Second City, famous comedy theater in Chicago, they were partnered with the Norwegian Cruise Lines. It no longer exists, that partnership. But I did 2 cruises, and there's 2 kind of sets of ships. So there's one that does like 2 or 3 shows throughout a week, and one that does 15 shows a week. And I was on the one that did 15 shows a week. So as a comedian, getting paid and not having any expenses. So you're just saving money, doing 15 shows a week. It's the greatest job ever. Of course, half of the cast is living below sea level. There's a lot of like weird international water laws. You have to do safety training. Like I died in a fake fire in my training, for example. Like there's a lot of things that are also challenging in a job like that, where you live in the same place as your castmates, because we're there for 4 months at a time. but we get to see the world. We get to be off the ship and see all these beautiful places. So for me, I loved it. I mean, I loved it so much that after my first one, I was like, when can I go back? But also there's this thing that the comedy scene moves very quickly. And when you're out there, you are worried that everyone's going to forget about you, or that the big theater will do the next hiring and they won't have you in mind. And some of those challenges, like when you have a lot of alone time on a rocky ship during the day, you're like thinking about your future. But then, you know, come 5 or 6 p.m., you're doing shows for a bunch of drunk people from New Jersey. What could be better?
I mean, how many nights a week do you end up working if you're doing 15 shows a week?
6. So we had Sundays off. So it was kind of like Groundhog's Day. Like every Sunday, we would port in New York City, and then we would just pretend to be nobodies. Like we'd walk around in the ship in our pajamas and just blend in with the cruisers. And it was and you kind of saw what type of people were on the ship that week. So you can already kind of, you know, graph out your demographic.
That's like that's the first day of the
exactly.
The cruise.
And then there were 3 nights a week that we did 3 shows. And so the way that we did the 15 show itinerary is that we did 9 scripted shows. So 3 different like sketch reviews 3 times a week, and then 6 short form comedy shows. Short form meaning like Whose Line Is It Anyway? Like short interactive games.
I mean, how, for the scripted work, if you're doing so much, you know, for different shows, how do you even keep that straight in your head?
Yeah, well, with a cast of ensemble, it is spread pretty evenly. I think they're pretty mindful of that when the director is casting, because you do 3 pretty intense weeks of training before you go on the ship, and then a pretty intense first onboarding week. But really, it's archival material of Second City. So it's material that is like fail-proof from a 60-year history. So you are doing some of the best scripts written by Steve Carell, and, you know, like, so they just worked. Yeah. Which was great. So you were just saying words from your favorite person in the world, and it got laughs, and it was not your jokes, and you got laughs on it. Not an experience that you get pretty often.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've heard very strange tales from cruise ship life from people who worked on cruise ships.
Yeah.
I'm sure you must have some absurd stories.
Whatever you're thinking stories is true. Whatever you're imagining as the craziest thing to happen is 100% true. It is like the real world at sea. So the crew is very involved with one another, which is the most polite way to say that. And when someone gets sick, everyone gets sick. So I did have to quarantine before I knew what quarantine was. This was, you know, pre-COVID. I didn't know that.
What year was this?
What'd you say?
Like what year was this?
My last one was in 2012, I think. Or maybe it was a little bit later, maybe 2014 or 2015. I honestly can't remember. It was all a fever dream. But yeah. And also, I remember I had to have a captain's meeting. I actually had to meet the captain because when I walked on stage one night, I kicked my leg in the air, like during the intro of my name, and I kicked my shoe, and it hit a woman in the nose in the front row and gave her an immediate bloody nose. And she like complained, which I was like, 1, you're at a comedy show. This is hilarious. and 2, it was obviously accidental. It's not like I was like, this woman will have the worst night of her life. But I did have to sit down with the captain and go through like the complaint form and all of that.
Was the captain pleased with your approach?
Yeah. I mean, there was only 6 comedians on the ship. I just went in and just would bullshit as hard as I could. I was like, listen, buddy, you know, and it was like this big stern Danish man or something. So, yeah, so I got away with that. But also like these safety things, like a bunch of comedians are going to be responsible for saving people's lives if this thing goes down. What an awful decision on everyone's part. I think I actually died in 2 fake fires. They did like a whole smoke demonstration and like got marked red, had to go to like the safety officer to like sign paperwork that understood that I needed to do better. And I was like I was watching TV in my room when smoke was coming through my door, and I was like, I feel like It's probably just like a demonstration. And the things that you could watch on the TV were like reruns of Friends, or like the thing that I would always watch on the TV, which was you put it on a channel that has a camera on the front of the ship. So you could just see where the ship was going.
Right.
That was like 100% of the time on my screen, because that was interesting for like when people would have to get airlifted, like in helicopters, or if like people were like sneakily making out up there. Like that was the entertainment.
Right.
So I had it on that channel 100% of the time.
Is that something that you would do now? Like, given the opportunity, would you do a cruise ship tour again?
I think yes, content wise. And I really like all the guest entertainers really found themselves being friends. Like we were friends with the dancers and the circus people. We were also jealous of them because they were like absolutely gorgeous and could do things with their bodies. So there was so many incredible people that you would meet. I have to admit, like, I already brought up like transportation's not my thing, but like I was seasick sometimes and I didn't always really love the feeling of being on a ship. So like if the ship was just still and I didn't go in hurricane season, then I would absolutely do it again. Because I went in some pretty rough waters and I would not do that again.
Is this something you're going to develop for Boom Chicago, the new Boom Chicago cruise ship tour?
I've already pitched it several times. I'm like, these cruise ships come in right over by Central. We should get on them. So I am always constantly pushing crazy ideas at Boom Chicago. And some of them have worked and some of them have not.
Were you also kind of like that as a kid? Were you like the pushing crazy ideas kid?
100% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially on my brothers. I have 2 brothers and I'm a middle child, which is why I'm a comedian. And I was always making them do crazy things. And actually, it was my older brother who got me into theater in general. He was doing musicals and theater, and I followed in his footsteps and then continued on.
What does your younger brother do?
He is a super impressive teacher. He teaches history. He's a father of 2. He's incredible. And my brother is an artist and a musician, a tattoo artist. So
did they stay around New York?
One of them is in Rhode Island and one of them is in New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and
East Coasters.
Is there ever kind of a pull for you to come back, and
from all my family members? Yes.
Be back with the family?
Always.
Yeah.
I think the most difficult times being away, well, COVID was really interesting because obviously I couldn't go back, or if I went back, I'd probably get stuck there. And that was not really an option for me. But I have found it a bit challenging being away. I now have a niece and a nephew, and I'm the godmother of my nephew. And that's hard to not like be there, see them grow up. Luckily, we have video chat and, photos are coming in almost too often, so I do get to see them. But almost 2 years ago, my mom passed away. And so when she was sick, I was going back and forth with money that I definitely didn't have. I think I went on like 8 or 9 flights in 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was going back like the minute she was like, I don't think I feel well today. I was like, I will be there in 7 hours. So it's moments like that then the kind of distance becomes difficult. But my family has been watching me do theater on stage since I was 8 or 9. They know how passionate I am. They all believe in me. They're sad I'm not around to be a part of it all, but they definitely support what I do.
Were they encouraging when you were younger? Were your parents encouraging of you doing theater?
Yeah. First, second row of every single musical and show I've ever done, ever. And inviting the entire town and nation to come to everything. And they share articles. I am going to be in the Parool, which is one of our Dutch newspapers, tomorrow, talking about queer comedy, alongside Derek Scott Mitchell, who's
also
a
lovely,
local legend, brilliant,
hilarious, double
Chicagoan,
Dutch, yeah.
And Katie Nixon, who's a Boom Chicago cast member. And I will always get a copy and send it home. My parents are like, please stop doing this. We can't read a word. It's just nice to see your photo. And then it just looks like hieroglyphics to us. We don't understand a word. So they do have a bunch of Dutch articles in their house and with no clue of what they say.
What's the piece on queer comedy that's coming up?
Yeah, it was a really interesting talk because I started like a queer comedy night I'm in charge of education and community. So we've started a queer community night. When Katie came over as a cast member, I said, like, I want to do more off stage, like of our boom shows, so that we can really get reps outside and build our personal voices and our point of views. And Katie immediately was on board with running and hosting that. So the whole conversation was, it was actually really interesting. And some of the questions were quite difficult. There was like a question that was, if you're queer and you write something, does that make it queer comedy? And then we have this like really long discussion that's not even in the article. So that's why I feel comfortable not having to reiterate it. But it was like, well, if someone queer wrote Jurassic Park and we didn't find out until 40 years later, is Jurassic Park queer movie? And that was really interesting. And Derek had gone to school for gender studies and had a lot of really interesting things to say. And I was there to support in terms of that, how important it is for me to build and produce diverse programming.
And were there other comedians interviewed for this?
No, it was just the three of us.
So all three, is Katie, where is she from? Is she American also?
Katie's also American.
So why
three Americans?
Yeah, why interview three Americans and no Dutch comedians?
It was about, I think it was more so about English speaking comedians, because who interviewed us has been writing quite a lot of pieces on the English speaking comedy scene in Amsterdam, because we've kind of burst a bubble in the last 5 years in a really exciting way.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this with other guests also, but I mean, the volume of, funny English-speaking comedians and performers that are coming through here now is just, I mean, it's like every week there's one or two different shows that you can go to just from people who are touring through, let alone people who are actually local and based here.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I also think, like, in terms of like our improv scene, like one thing that's really exciting is when I started the Boom Academy. So Boom didn't have our own curriculum. We were like, they had classes throughout the years here and there, focused a lot of on like corporate classes and team building and presentation skills and stuff like that. And I had run 2 training centers before, Comedy Sports in Chicago and Improv Boston in Cambridge. You're not allowed to say it was in Boston. It was in Cambridge. Boston people are very picky. I fought a lot of Bostonians. But I said to Andrew,
Andrew Moscow,
the founder of Boom Chicago, I said, like, listen, give me 6 months and I'm going to write a curriculum for Boom Chicago that actually teaches what we do on our stages. And he had full trust, that yes and mentality that's very common at Boom Chicago and in the improv world. And in 2021, I took over the training center in 2020 during COVID. We did some online classes. I was building curriculum, on the fly with all the time I had. And in 2021, we launched our own formal curriculum. And now it's been around for, 5 years, almost 5 years. And we have almost like 120 students every 8 weeks. And we're teaching improv and stand-up and storytelling and comedy writing and musical improv. And I do think that the independent comedy scene, it was really great to see the images of all of the comedians in Wesley's newspaper, Wesley, friend of the podcast, because I had taught 90 of them, like it was so cool.
This was the photo project of all, like the 100 different funny English-speaking comedians here.
And it was so exciting to see the impact of the Academy. Of course, that's not the only thing. I mean, really, comedy is one of those things that it's so community driven. And once someone sees something that they love, then they want to be a part of it. But I have definitely seen firsthand the power of the training center. And that's been a very cool experience for me.
Okay. So then what I'm wondering is, aside from kicking cruise ship patrons in the face, and
it was an accident, Zach.
I mean, potato.
Yeah.
Aside from, that incident, and then, you've got the types of laughs that you get on a cruise ship, the types of laughs that you get at an improv theater in Chicago. What are your audiences like here? How would you describe your like typical Amsterdam or Dutch audience?
I think that, they're very international, right? So we have very international audiences from all over. And that is really, really kind of a cool thing to be a comedian for an international audience, because I was saying earlier, like, it does force you to be a universal comedian. The things that you could rely on earlier in the States, for example, like your references, they just don't work anymore. You can't be like, oh my gosh, I went to Walgreens. They'll be like,
what's a Walgreens?
What are you talking about? So that has been great, because then you kind of have to like research and get deeper in the culture and really kind of find ways to like integrate so that your comedy is for everyone. And I also think that the way that we're trained as Boom Chicago actors, that it feels very much like we're setting up a party that everyone's invited to. Like that's how shows feel like for me at Boom Chicago. And there's some part of it as a comedian that you have to say when you're about to go on stage, like, of course, the show is for you, but you have to give a little of the show for yourself. You have to say, this is for me. And I do think that that's a very annoyance thing, which is a comedy theater in Chicago. Like, if you give yourself something, then you're automatically serving everyone else. So if you're a little bit selfish, it's actually going to be a great trait for your ensemble, because you're giving yourself a character, you're giving yourself a point of view. So I do think, like, as the ensembles get stronger and we're playing together more, that's when the shows become easier and we're getting those bigger laughs. Like, you can definitely feel there's periods of time when we are onboarding that the shows feel different, or, more heavy-handed veterans versus new folks. But I do think, like, we're in a day and age that now people are really ready to laugh and they're ready to participate. Like, I do find the Boom Chicago audiences ready to like yell out in a room full of strangers, or if they're not in the first 10 minutes and they see one crazy person do it, then they're ready to for the rest of the show. But it was a learning curve performing for Dutch people, because you have to earn their laughs. It's the same as just being friends with them. Like, they're not just going to throw you a laugh, you have to earn it. And once you've broken them, you've succeeded.
It's a little bit of a different way that other people describe audiences here, because other people
folded arms,
yeah. But still coming up after the show and saying how great the show was and how much they enjoyed it, but not really, giving you that as a performer during the show itself.
I think it's a very specific demographic of people that do that, because I definitely remember my first week. There was a guy that I was roasting the entire show. He would not smile. He had his arms folded the entire time. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, this is a pretty good show. Like, what's wrong with this guy? And after, he's like, thank you. That was the most impressive show I've ever seen in my entire life. And then, like, smoke bomb, like, totally gone in an instant. So Dutch people will always give you feedback. They are not afraid of giving you feedback. But I appreciate that. That makes you such a resilient performer. It's not always nice when someone comes up and says, like, you were not my favorite, but I enjoyed the show. And you're like, well, who was?
Yeah. Am I in your top 5?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Please, top 5, please. So I definitely think that at every single show, there are, Dutch people that you have to work a little bit harder. But I do think that over the years, especially because Matt, Simon, and I, for example, friends of the podcast, have all been here for 6 or 7 years, and we've worked together so closely. So we know the recipe for what makes a good or a successful show or a fun show. And I think that, I used to really worry about those people when I first moved here, of like, am I not going to be able to make like 30% of the audience laugh? And I don't care about that anymore. Yeah.
Do you sometimes find that, you have to adjust the way that you deliver a joke, or you adjust your word choice, and that maybe you would have gotten a bigger laugh?
Yeah, for sure. But it's in the moment. So you can, shake your fists at the sky after an improv show and be like, I should have, and I could have. Yeah, but you didn't. And now it's over, and it will never happen again. That was the opening and closing night of that. So that's kind of one thing that you, I think, get over pretty quickly. But I definitely feel like, you need to like learn to explain your references a little bit more. So we do a little bit more, exposition at Boom Chicago than maybe I've played before in Chicago or in the States. And it is definitely different to play here, but I do think there's also fun moments where we really show ourselves in the shows. Mm-hmm. So we are in the scenes, then we are characters. And when we're hosting, we are commenting and we are roasting and we're having a good time. And I even think that there's been some times where I've like we play this game called Sex With Me, where we compare this suggestion with what it's like to have sex with us. Classic Boom Chicago game. And I think that sometimes I've had like a really good joke and it just like literally did not land. And I'll just say to the audience, like, you're wrong. That one was hilarious. You know what I mean? And I'm not afraid to say that because then I get a laugh from that and it's okay that my joke has not landed. So there's fun things that we're always kind of like playing with the audience in that regard.
Do you ever take one of those lines that you have so much confidence in and tweak it and work on it and then use it again in another show?
Honestly, that's not that fun. It's more fun to be surprised by everything. Like, of course, we know each other, so we know what our strengths and weaknesses are as improvisers. So we know how to gift the people on stage with something that they're going to knock out of the park, for example. But even getting the same suggestion, like we do try to find ways to then get different suggestions. Like you can get a suggestion, like hear a suggestion that someone yells that you've heard a million times and you'd be like, great, pickle is a great suggestion. What's another food that's green? And just by being like, great job, that's not what I want.
Right.
And getting cucumber, great, cucumber is essentially a pickle, a younger pickle, if you will. But then you really do want to be challenged to really create new material. Yeah, I think that's different if you do stand-up or storytelling where it involves a lot of the editing process and trying the same thing out over in different ways. But for improv, I would say that's different.
Do you ever do that with Stace Jam? Which, no, it's hard to tell when you watch it how much of it is.
It's all improvised.
It's totally improvised.
And the beauty of that show is that it was created totally by accident. And it makes me feel like a total loser of how it started. But I was in Boston and I didn't really have any friends there yet because I had just moved there. And when you just move, but you move there and you move somewhere in like a high position, it's a little bit intimidating because I was running the training center and there was like 500 students every 8 weeks. So it was a very big training center. And I had hired a music director and asked a few people that I had just met if they would do a musical improv set with me. And the day of, every single person backed out. They were either sick or something came up. But I already had hired this music director. So I was like, I just threw this guy $50. I'm going to do the show.
Right.
So I was like, well, I guess, you only live once. And I did the saddest. It was not a comedy show. It was a sad improvised 15 minutes of me sad singing. And I was like, woof, that I never want to do again. But I do want to find how this can work. So I did it again a few months later. I signed up and I was like, you know what, let's do this again. And it was super funny and had absolutely no heart. So it was like super wild characters, but it just didn't have the heart that I really love in a comedy show. So then I started to work on a format where it would bring both comedy and a little bit of groundedness and a little bit of myself in it. Mm-hmm. So it started as that. And also I was teaching musical improv at so many improv festivals. And then I couldn't show off what I was teaching. Everyone could show off their formats of, improvised M. Night Shyamalan or whatever it is. But I couldn't sing because no one else, the other teachers wanted to. So that was also a great accidental gift because then I was able to take that on the road and work with a local musician and always be able to show off the skills that I had just taught for 6 days in a row, for example.
Is it a hard thing to teach other performers the importance of being yourself even in improv? Because I think perhaps a lot of people see improv and they think that it's all just so on the fly that people are kind of divorcing themselves from the situation a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people do want to be funny. And I would say that I had that experience more in the States because Chicago's such a comedy city that people really wanted to pursue comedy. And it's so different here because it is literally people that are doing this to find community because they're from somewhere else and they don't know anyone. So it's totally different. But it really depends on the curriculum. And one of the things that is really important that we teach really early on is bringing emotion in and playing scenes as yourself. So just having an improvised conversation, but saying yes. So we start there. And then we teach character, for example, at Boom in level 3. So you've already had 16 weeks where you've not even thought about character before we introduce it. So we kind of have a tool belt, and these are all the tools, and use what works for you. So I think that if you start off that way, it's much easier. And if in level 1, you're like, try on the crazy character, then to tell people to be themselves later on is a much more difficult task. Yeah.
In the last 6 years,
Mhm.
you've gone from living in Chicago to moving out here with your
Mhm.
boyfriend, gone through the COVID pandemic in a completely new environment in a new city where you barely knew anybody. You and your boyfriend split up.
Mhm.
COVID kind of ended. Your mom passed away. You're in a new relationship after around that
Wild
same
ride
time.
now that you say it.
I mean, it's a heavy 6 years.
Yeah.
You know, so how much of performing has kind of been that way to help you through this time, or how
Yeah,
is
so that's
performing played
actually
a
a
role in that?
really interesting question, because I actually did step back from performing a little bit during my phase of grief. Grief is forever. It doesn't get easier. Don't believe anything that anyone tells you, but you do learn to cope with it. The tools become easier, and you learn more ways to kind of deal with it. But I didn't want to go on stage, and it wasn't because I was going to cry through every single show. It just felt like for me, it's so important as like a perfectionist. I'm such a Virgo that I'm there to make people laugh. And if I'm not fully myself, I feel like that's unfair to audience members. And that's just a me thing. That's not for everyone, but that is for me. And I also think like Boom has been such a constant. They were so supportive throughout everything, and so was my cast, but especially Saskia Maas, who is the founder. She was like so incredible to work with throughout that entire period. And I also think like, yeah, so Boom was a big support system. And even being off stage, I still was teaching here and there. My students give me a lot of energy, and teaching gives me a lot of energy because you can see those people being sparked with that joy for the very first time. But also like, yeah, my partner also had lost his mom a year before me, before I even started dating him. So I had that support network already of like someone that had gone through it and had tools and could see me through it. So I do think that, yeah, kind of all of those things combined. I always say that like performing is very therapeutic, but it's not therapy. And like I do want to make it very clear that I don't think it's a replacement for therapy. And I do think it is dangerous when people think that is the case. But it is very therapeutic to be on stage. And I felt very welcomed back to the stage every time I came, whether it was sporadically or for a short period, and then I would take another break because I wasn't ready. But every single time I walked back on that stage at Boom Chicago, I felt very welcome. And that, I think, was a huge component of it all.
How much time did you actually step back from it?
Well, I had stepped back as artistic director because it is very challenging to be artistic director, full stop, especially when you are a comedian, because I was taking care of so many other people and not myself. So I was, making the schedules of other comedians and making sure that they felt safe and they felt comfortable, but I wasn't always doing the same thing for me. And to be able to manage all of those things at the same time was the most difficult thing while grieving. So that was the first thing that I had stepped away from, which was very difficult because I really love that position. I still obviously am very involved in Boom, but in just a way that is a little bit more behind the scenes, that gives me a little bit more space to create. And there was, I would say for like 2 or 3 months, I pretty much was not on stage, which was the longest time in the history of me ever performing that I was not on stage, which is pretty crazy. And then I just came back kind of slowly. I actually came back to a full schedule, and it was a bit too much for me. And then I now do less shows, for example. So I just had to kind of experiment and find what worked and what I was capable of doing.
Yeah. What was it that, inside you that made it be like, okay, now's the time. Now's when I feel like I'm ready to actually get back out there for
Well, I
one
think
show?
yeah, I don't know because I also like, yeah, part of you when you've been doing comedy is you need the stage, like you crave it and that audience interaction and that relationship and that, and also like that socializing. Like there's part of you that just like craves that creative outlet. Like I knew I wanted to be on stage right away, but it didn't feel fair to me or to the audience. And then once I was like, okay, I have enough tools in my tool belt that I'm able to create and feel like safe and I'm not going to break down immediately on stage because some of our stories involve true personal monologues.
Mhm.
And at that time, there's this one show, it's my favorite show to do. It's on Sundays. It's called Sunday Night Live. And it's in Armando style, which is there's someone in the cast tells a true personal monologue and then we improvise based on that. And it's amazing because we get to learn so much about each other from that because you always hear a new story and you're like, what? I didn't know that about. That's incredible. What? You went to camp there? Like it's not only great for our camaraderie, but everything reminded me of my mom. So I didn't, and some of those stories are tragic and that's totally fine. But I was not interested on every single Sunday, someone being like platypus. And I was like, my mom died. You know what I mean? Like I needed to just, yeah, I'm fine with dark humor. I make jokes about it now. But yeah, every single thing, overalls. My mom had overalls in the 70s. So I just didn't want to go there and spill that every week. So that was kind of what I needed a little bit of a step back from.
And now do you still feel like you're kind of, a little bit distanced from it, or are you really back in full now?
I am, I would say 75% back. So, I mean, 100% comedy festival right now and 100% running the training center. But in terms of shows, not fully back yet. And that's okay because I'm also giving myself space to write a lot more, which I really love to do. I'm working on a new solo show and like a scripted one. And I've been writing a lot of like serial comedy essays about grief. And that's been really nice to kind of touch base with people all over the world that are going through the same things. So I'm at Boom Chicago, I'm not fully back, but I feel fully back as an artist where I'm just now doing different things than I was before.
Mm. What's the scripted show that you're working on?
I'm working on a new solo show that I think will be called Morning Person, but spelled morning. Mourning. Just for those of you, I don't want anyone to be guessing. Yeah, that kind of deals about being an expat and being distanced while grieving and kind of how that's affected me. And also like the hilarious things that you don't think about grief of like planning a funeral and also the differences of how I imagine it would be planning a funeral in the States versus Dutch people planning a funeral. All of those all of those great things. So I'm slowly but surely working on that.
When what do you think is your timeline on that?
I hope this fall. I am the kind of person that like usually I'll just put a show on and be like, I've got to do it now. It's October 2nd. I have to work towards that. But I'm going to survive the Boom Chicago Comedy Festival first. 10 days of nonstop comedy chaos. And then I'm going to regroup and start to focus on it.
Why do you want to do a scripted show now? Because earlier you were also kind of saying that it's more fun doing the spontaneity aspect and not necessarily tweaking and working on every line till you get it just right. So what is it about this that makes you want to do scripted?
I just think that sometimes the written word you can get a lot more across in. Like, so you can give your point of view. In improv, you can, but it's so fleeting. It happens so quickly. So of course you can get your point of view out, but how often in an improv show do I, am I inspired by something and I'm like, I'm going to make a huge commentary on what it's like to grieve right now. Not so often in improv shows. Thank goodness for all of us. But I also, I've been doing scripted theater my entire life. So it's something that I've been like itching to get back to. I've always missed doing musicals and I like doing musical comedy. So there'll be songs in it. So I'm just kind of like essentially going back to my roots of like where it all began because scripted theater is where I started.
And, were you always full-time performing? Were you always making your living doing performing full-time, or did you ever, have to, have a real job?
Define real job. Is nanny a real job? So basically, when I started in Chicago, I nannied and worked at a preschool and like mostly did like daycare and childcare. And I would like work at a preschool from like 6:30 in the morning to 6:30 at night and then do shows until midnight. But I was lucky that I was hired by Second City pretty early on in my career and then was able to not be like throwing money around. I was definitely struggling and living paycheck to paycheck. But after my first ship gig, I had saved enough money to say like, okay, this is what I want to now invest in and kind of go from there.
Right.
But yeah, it was pretty scary for a few years. I mean, I think for all of us, I don't come from money. Sorry, Dad. But yeah, so it was definitely not easy. So I think like the move to Amsterdam, was a welcome.
It's easier to save money here, kind of too, isn't it?
Yeah,
Anyway.
I think so,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, because you don't want to go to restaurants because no one will ever look at you. Jesus. That's Jesus in Dutch.
But you're in your mid-30s, and
Thank you.
you're welcome. And and you've been working in comedy for, basically 20 years at this point. So, who are the comedy heroes for you that you've always had?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think like very early on when I was like 6 or 7, I was watching Carol Burnett, I Love Lucy, Gilda Radner on SNL, like The Good Days. And I loved that. I really liked, I was drawn to really goofy female comics. And my mom really kind of pushed that because it was something that she really, really loved, even though she was afraid of like literally her shadow. Like the fact that my mom would never speak into a microphone, for example. So I don't know where I've come from. But then really it's interesting because I do feel like a lot of of course, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler were people that I really loved watching. And then that was what originally got me to Second City. But I do think that like now that becomes a much more difficult question to ask because a lot of my comedy heroes are improvisers that no one quite knows, that are not, the level of fame that if I name dropped them, people would be like, oh yeah, I've seen them in a million things. There was just really some incredible improvisers that I watched growing up through when I was a student at all of the Chicago comedy theaters that just never failed to make me laugh or that were just like so goofy. I mean, I guess Tim Robinson is now doing quite a lot. And he was someone I got to watch on stage a lot when I was a student. He has the show, I Think You Should Leave. And he was on Saturday Night Live briefly and is in a new film with Paul Rudd. I love Paul Rudd so much. That's a totally different podcast. My love for Paul Rudd. He's someone that I'm really drawn to. Of course, like every comedy writer, like I feel really lucky that I'm somehow connected in a familial way now to Seth Meyers because I find him to just be like brilliant. Like he does so many things that no other late night talk show host can do. Like just the segment, what jokes that Seth can't tell with Amber and Jenny, like that's so smart. Like he makes space for everyone on his show. And I really love inclusive comedy that is also, digs deep and can be political satire and social satire. So I feel lucky to be able to like see him at a very close angle.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of my favorite comedians are improvisers that are just kind of doing what I'm doing in other random little cities. Yeah.
And are you going to get to perform with any of these favorite improvisers, in the coming weeks at the Boom Chicago
so
extravaganza?
Tomorrow night, I'll be on stage with, we have a big, huge alumni show. It's so crazy. And it's a producer's worst nightmare, but it will be so joyous. I'll be on stage with Seth Meyers and Josh Meyers, Ike Barinholtz. That will be my first time being on stage with him. And I'm literally going to die because I do find him to be one of the most hilarious human beings. just as a human, like also in all of the things that he's in, but he's just so funny. And Brendan Hunt, I've been on stage with a lot. He'll be back. And Peter Grosz, who's a pretty famous Chicago actor that's also an improviser that I've never been on stage with, that I'm really excited to take the stage with. So those are the ones I'm most excited about. Everyone else, I'm sorry, but those ones I'm very excited about.
I think that's a great place to leave it. So if people want to find you and where you're performing, or if they want to go see Stace Jam or find out about your one-woman show eventually coming up, how do they find you?
So you can find me in the walls of Boom Chicago on the Rosengracht in Amsterdam, or on my website. I regularly post all of the things that I'm doing, all of the classes that I'm teaching.
What's your website?
www.stacysmithcomedy.com.
Okay, cool. Stacey, thanks so much. It's lovely that you were able to run away from 60 Minutes and run away from the biggest Boom Chicago event of the year just to sit down and join us for an hour. That's great.
I appreciate it. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so I feel very honored.
Damn Yankee is produced in partnership with NL Times, the top choice for English language news from the Netherlands. Founded nearly 15 years ago, NL Times grew to become the #1 site for information about this country, featuring more news stories every day of the week than any other website. Keep tabs on the latest top stories and breaking news from across the entire country, not only in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague. Find out more at nltimes.nl. Damn Yankee is an NL Times podcast. The show was created by me and Peach Rizzo. Peach produced this episode, and Marcus Engel edited the episode.